It's 2017. It's been 3 years since Godzilla hit cinemas, and now Kong Skull Island is out. What's going on? There's now the two big hitters of the monster world in cinema. Is it going to be as good as Godzilla 2014? And will it rectify the problems in that? Or will it go a complete different direction? So, Kong Skull Island 2017, second film in the MonsterVerse series. At the time we didn't know that though, but now we do. We've had Godzilla, and that's his origin story in the MonsterVerse canon, and now we've got Kong Skull Island, and now this is very much, even more so, the origin story. So, Godzilla, we've had his origin story in the 2014 adaptation by Gareth Edwards. Watch my review on that, thank you very much, very kind of you. Now it's 3 years later and we've got Kong Skull Island, which is even more an origin story of Kong. The film opens up with two fighter pilots in World War II coming down and crash landing on this island and chasing each other. One's an American, one's a Japanese. They're fighting, they've shot at each other and they've run out of bullets, both of them. The Japanese fighter pilot pulls out a sword and chases the American into this forest. And just as the Japanese fighter pilot is about to stab the American, who appears on this cliff edge but Kong? And he says, "Return to monkey." No, he doesn't. He just looks at them and they shit themselves. Roll credits. And then it fast forwards to the 70s and we're introduced to some new characters. We meet two guys from this research group called Monarch, which you'll know from the first Godzilla film if you've seen that, who they are. But they'll tell you in this film. They're a research group and they want to find big monsters. That's about it. They go to the Senate and they ask for permission to do it because right now they don't have a lot of funding in the 70s. Basically, they get the funding and then they start to put a team together to go over to this island, which is literally called Skull Island because it's shaped like a skull. No one's ever been there before. So they want to go there and research whatever's there, right? So they have to get a team together. They get army grunts. They get like some captain who's played by Samuel L. Jackson, who's now a defunct captain from the army because he's been fighting in the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War's over. So he's disgruntled from that. He recruits some grunts and they go and join the research duo from Monarch and go and do that. But also, not just them, you also have Tom Hiddleston, who's this Brit, well, he's a Brit in America, and he is like, I don't know how to describe him. He's like Bear Grylls, right, but like mixed with Indiana Jones. And then you've got Brie Larson, who's called Shannon Weaver or something, and she's a photojournalist. And there you go, that's your tiny little cast that you've got, right, all together. So you're introduced to the slew of these characters, and then they head over to Kong Skull Island, and as they all fly there in their armada of helicopters, and they make it through this massive storm and rain that nearly kills them all, they get to Skull Island, whoa. And then who's there? Kong. Massive, big, succulent, striated monkey, and he's not very happy. They all shoot him because he's like fucking massive. He's like, I don't know, 150 feet tall. And Kong doesn't like that, so he goes bonk, bonk, bonk and slaps all these helicopters. And that's basically the start of the film. And it goes from there. They're on this island and they try and gotta get out, right? Ta-da! So that takes us to about half an hour into the film, and I'm going to start making some general points. First off, this film, unlike Godzilla, is tonally all over the place. I can't tell sometimes if it's supposed to be funny, if it's supposed to be serious and have a serious message. I don't know. And there's a few kind of things working against it. So, first off, you've got Larry Fong, who is a very, very well-known cinematographer and has worked a lot with Zack Snyder. Now, if you've seen any of Zack Snyder's films, you'll know how in-your-face they are, and especially the cinematography. I talked previously in Godzilla how Seamus Garvey and Gareth Edwards worked together really seamlessly in creating this gritty tone, this dark tone for Godzilla, this refrain from trying to show you them, build suspense, Jaws style. And it really works. It really does work. In this, it just feels a bit more disjointed. So the helicopter fight scene, which I just kind of started talking about, it doesn't have any of the grounded elements and logic that McGarvey has in Godzilla. You've got cameras attached to these helicopters are being slapped around, there's this weird kind of like fake motion blur that's going on, you've got the hair of the actors, I don't have any hair as you can tell, but slightly blowing in the wind. You don't really know where anything's happening at any time because there's these helicopters flying around. You don't really get long enough to kind of take in what's going on. There's loads of cuts, there's loads of camera angles, there's lots of movement going on, and I think this is the problem with a lot of the Zack Snyder films, is they think lots of things going on screen visual wise, lots of colours, lots of explosions, lots of movement equals good action, and it just doesn't. And as I talked in my Godzilla review, there's this coalescence and working of different disparate techniques in terms of visual effects to make it work, whether it be rotoscoping, green screen, practical effects, whatever. And I just felt that this film just didn't achieve that as well as what happened in Godzilla, because I can tell a lot of the time that it's been shot on green screen, or I can tell that they're doing stuff in post and whatnot, and it just takes me out of it, where Godzilla kind of enveloped me in it, and everything was to develop this awe and whatever, where in Kong, I didn't know what they wanted me to feel. I didn't know what they wanted their intended effect was, because when Kong is just stood there, they immediately reveal what Kong looks like. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but when he just goes around smacking stuff and the camera's flying around like 3D style, it just kind of takes me out of it. It's not really effective. It's not clear enough with terms of what is going on action wise, and realistic and visually realistic enough that it makes me get excited for the action, because it's too frenetic, and it doesn't do anything in terms of like what Godzilla does in terms of refrain to make it scary. So you're kind of left in the middle of trying to figure out what's going on action wise, and you're not really getting anywhere, and you're being taken out of it because of the pretty good, I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar budget thing, right? So it doesn't look shit, it doesn't look like crap, but you can tell that there's a lot of CG work done. And, there is a mix of use of, because I've seen the behind the scenes, there is a use of practical effects, the spinning of the cargo bit, or the main shell of a helicopter at one point. So that's cool, but again, it's used sparingly, and I feel like the green screen is the bigger kind of use of it, especially when it's just like characters standing in the jungle bit. They're not on location, it seems, for a lot of it. So that kind of takes me out of it, frankly, and it doesn't make the best viewing experience. Also, kind of what massively pissed me off about the film is that you've got Kong, right, slapping all these army dudes around and blowing up these helicopters, and they're dying left, right and centre. But lo and behold, he takes down every single helicopter, right? But then Brie Larson, Tom Hiddleston, comes out of the fucking helicopter after being slapped, and neither of them have got fucking hair out of place. No cuts, no blood, no bleeding. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, it just completely took me out of it. Like, some of the main army dudes, you think broken limbs, like fractures, blood everywhere, whatever. There's those guys who you don't know who die, who get, like, eaten, destroyed, flicked, punched, whatever, blown up, right? But then all the main characters, they survive. And they not only survive, but they survive, like, almost unscathed. Like, yeah, there's a bit of blood here and there, but... And I mean, fucking Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston could have walked on a bloody set for Vogue, and no one have looked badly at them because they look fucking flawless. And it completely takes you out of the film. So, that pisses me off. And it furthermore, and I need to get on this point, look, Brie Larson says in one of the behind the scenes things, because I know she, like, her PR isn't great. Like, if you've seen her in, like, that famous interview that she did for Marvel, and she's basically having a spat with, Thor, because they ask who's the most powerful character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In this behind the scenes thing, she says that, it was a real conscious decision for Shannon Weaver's character to not use the gun because she's a photojournalist and she's anti-war and everything. And I'm just thinking, right, that's great, but you have to remember, you're in fucking Kong Skull Island here. Like, people want to see the big monkey punch things. That's the main point. And also, her character isn't fucking developed that much. So when she walks around with the camera, there's a bit in the film, later on in the film, where they're basically getting attacked all sides by these things called skull crushers, which are these awful kind of like two-legged, long-tailed, like lizard things with like a skull for a head, and they're eating people left, right and centre. Like, by the way, I don't know how many fucking army dudes they have, because they seem to spawn out of nowhere. They're all gone at one point, you know, except the few of them that you actually know the names of. But then when they need to fight, there's one guy and he's got a fucking flamethrower. There's like 5 more guys and like they shoot. I'm like, hang on, I don't remember these guys. I don't remember this battalion of people, but they just spawn out of nowhere because there's an action scene. So okay. And anyway, they like cut into each of the characters, and they've got like, one's got a sword, others got a gun, others got a flamethrower, others got bombs and grenades and things. And then there's her in a bloody tank top with a fucking Fujifilm camera, and you're like, shouldn't she have a gun? Shouldn't someone give her a gun? Or shouldn't she be asking for a gun? And yet, spoiler, she survives. And it's just like, this is bullshit. This is, I don't know if the idea was it was supposed to make this deeper point about, I don't know, female heroes. Like, that's the sense I got in this behind the scenes thing. But she didn't need a gun to fight, and it wasn't within her character. But I'm like, look, it doesn't make fucking sense, and it takes me out of the film once again. And I think that's the fundamental issue with this film, is that at least with Godzilla, I was enveloped in what was happening because it looked visually amazing, and the refrain of showing the creatures built a lot of tension, and you had the witness of characters to these absolute godlike creatures, and that got me in. Yes, the heart and soul of the film died on very early, and it suffered because of it massively, and you don't see the creatures fight for like till the last 10 minutes of the film. So, you know, it did have its flaws, but with Kong, you know, these deeper messages of like, oh, this character who, she's a journalist, and so therefore she doesn't need to pick up a gun, just seems so out of place. And look, like, if it's not going to be enveloping because Larry Fong's not really done a good job of making it, you know, I don't know, inviting you into this world, which it didn't for me, and if it did for you, that's great. Enjoy this film because it's done really well. It's done better on IMDb than most of the other films in the Monsterverse series. But for me, it just didn't envelop me enough. So, you know, seeing in the behind the scenes that she, you know, it's this commentary on, you know, photojournalism or whatever, I just thought, no, because I just watched it and it just looks like bullshit. So anyway, that's by the by. I'll start harping on that a little bit. But fundamentally, it's totally all over the place, and the visual cinematography aspect doesn't help with that. I'm not meaning to harp on Larry Fong all the time, because, you know, in certain kind of films, his style really does work. I've not seen Watchmen, but I can imagine, and, you know, like 300, that would work. But in this, you know, in the action scenes at the end, now it does work at the end, but in like other bits it just doesn't. So there's that helicopter bit, but there's also this other bit where like all these characters are like meeting up and they're having a chat and a dialogue about what they need to do. Samuel L. Jackson's there, and by this point in the film he's well pissed off at Kong for killing his men, and his kind of character arc, though very flimsy, and I would say for all the characters, the character arcs are pretty one-dimensional and very simple and not really kind of given much heart and soul, frankly. They're all just kind of like caricatures. Soldier 1, Soldier 2, this soldier's funny, this soldier's scared, this soldier's a boy, this soldier's dead. You know, it's like, there's not much there. Or like, for example, bloody Tom Hiddleston. Tom Hiddleston's sexy and the voice of reason. Brie Larson is sexy and Kong likes her. Right, that's about it. But anyway, they all meet up to have this dialogue. And you expect when it's two people chatting on camera, you will get shot reverse shot. Now, people know that as soon as you add a third element into the conversation, that's difficult to film that, because if you do shot reverse shot, one, that gets boring very quickly, and two, you can break the 180 degree rule. You have a line, that's 180 degrees, camera's on one side of it, your actors are on the other. As soon as the camera goes on the other side of it, you've broken that 180 degrees of where the actors are, and therefore you've flipped where the characters are, and it's very confusing. It happens in The Shining, but Stanley Kubrick means to do it because that's where there's a mental snap of the main character in the film. That's great. But this rule is completely fucking shut out the window in this scene, because the camera's jumping everywhere and you're like, you're there, and it's, instead of it, this is, I could understand the confusion aspect in terms of the action scene at the start with the helicopter, but not in this scene. This is just where characters are chatting, you know, and it's an essential part of the story. So it's a bit like it's not very good. So kind of lets me down there as well, the cinematography. I've kind of mentioned it already, but as I said, the cast is so like massive that it would have had to probably been like 3 hours to do justice to any of these characters. And even within the 2 hours of a lot of time, Most of these characters are just kind of like, I don't know, caricatures. They've only got like one thing about them. So, for example, you've got like Jason Mitchell plays Mills. He's scared and he's comic relief. Cole, played by Shea Wiggum, he's the foil playing it straight to him. You've got Slivko, who's Thomas, played by Thomas Mann. He's just a kid, so I think that's to like engender sympathy. You've got Reles, who's played by Eugene Cordero, and I'm shitting you not. All he does really is hold a big gun and have massive arms. Like, I don't think he really has much to do in the film. And then you've got like Toby Kebbell. In fairness, Toby Kebbell, he plays a guy called Jack, and he has a son back at home. And do you know what? I did want him to survive because I wanted him to go see his boy. But that's really it, you know. The appeal to emotion is pretty flimsy. And for those characters, it's not really a problem because they're minor characters. But when you've got this kind of flimsy writing style applied to the antagonist, aka Samuel L. Jackson, then you've got a big problem. So with Samuel L. Jackson's character, as I briefly mentioned, he's now basically an inactive captain. He was fighting in the American army and fighting against the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War being the backdrop to the film. But right at the start of the film, he opens this kind of little treasure box of all his medals, and he looks down at it after he gets the news that the war's over. He looks down and goes, what was this all for? Like, all these lives lost. And then the idea is that Kong is the new kind of like Vietnam to conquer. He's the new thing to fight against. And obviously Kong kills his men, so that reignites his vengeful kind of nature. But the problem is that whilst, yes, this idea is there and it makes sense, it's just not compelling because it doesn't really go explored any further. Like, Samuel L. Jackson just kind of says, I have to do this after they killed my men, and he just repeats that. And we're like, yeah, he's crazy, but there isn't, like, for example, he could have left the island, right? He could have left Kong Skull Island and got more men back at home with the evidence that they've gathered if he tries to, you know, take some pictures, which Brie Larson's character could have done, and then they could have come back and killed him. He could have been smart, but he didn't do that. Instead, he just goes on the suicide mission and makes everyone try and kill Kong, right? And it's just stupid. It's not compelling because it's so flimsy. And he's not like a character like, I love to hate him kind of thing, like he's so cartoonishly evil that you're like, oh, that bastard, I hate him. He's just a bit like, oh, fucking hell, here he goes again. And this is Samuel L. Jackson. You know, he's a fantastic actor, and you're just a bit like, meh about it. It's just not good. So these points kind of all come together because the film is so fast-paced. You know, like Mark Kermode talks about it in one of his old videos that he put out ages ago, and he said that he learned this technique to understand the pace of a film, and you can do it by clapping every time there's a cut. And I did it while watching the film because I wasn't really invested in it. And I was clapping and it was going like this. You know, it was really quite quick. You know, that's like 5-7 cuts there in a few seconds, where something like Godzilla was a lot more slower. And it was... And there's a time and a place for fast cuts in films, don't get me wrong, because, you know, you speed up the flow of a film or the pace of a film and then you slow it back down. But this film's just kind of like, right, we've got to get through this because they've got this massive cast and they've got to get a lot done in these 2 hours. You've got to set up the future films, you've got to establish the themes of the films, you've got to try and do some character arcs with all these characters, which there are way too many of. You've got to go from one location in America to then Skull Island and try and get them out. It's too much, it's over bloated, and I think the only way to rectify that is cut out the fodder, cut out the fucking loads of other characters, you know, that you didn't need. And it almost gets to kind of like comedic levels of daftness in terms of how flimsy the writing is, because at the end of the film, when it's getting into the action scene, basically the prelude to the final action scene where Kong... By the way, Kong's not really in this film, so it should just be called Skull Island, really, but it wouldn't sell. But Kong's going to fight this massive skull crusher thing, and just as they're trying to leave and run away from this skull crusher thing, Shea Wiggum's character, who's, you know, kind of basically, till this point, been a comedic foil to another character, Jason Mitchell's Mills, and what he does is he turns around, and bearing in mind, they're all running away, and, you know, it's one of those things like, because Larry Fong's not showing you where the creature is and the humans are in context, you can't see how close it's getting because he keeps shooting them from the side like this. So you know, you could make it that they could run fucking 200 metres and that the creature couldn't catch them up, right? When feasibly it could if you fucking measure the speed of them, right? So, anyway, he could have masked that issue, is what I'm saying. They could have got away, but instead, what he does is he turns around, you having, as an audience member, no understanding of where the creature is in relation to, and he turns around, and he just goes, that's it, I give up. And, like, you know, Jason Mill's character kind of, like, turns around and goes, no, don't do it, don't go, and he's like, that's it. And he pulls, like, these 2 grenades out and flicks them out, and he's like going to sacrifice himself, and it goes all slow-mo, and then you do finally see the fucking Skull Crusher thing, you know, in situ with Shea Wiggum's character, so you realise how close it is. And actually, it's not even that fucking close. They could have kept running for a bit longer, but instead they decide to have this stupid conversation of, don't sacrifice yourself. He's like, no, I'm going to sacrifice myself, even though I probably could have gone to Mackey's in the time that it's taken us to have this fucking conversation. So he pulls these 2 grenades out, and the best part is, and this is what makes it funny, is he's supposed to do this heroic sacrifice thing and blow himself up and kill the creature. The creature stops, looks at him, and then he slaps him with his tail and yeets him across the bloody fucking continent, and he blows up on the other side, and you're just like, right, am I supposed to feel sad now because you've got the other characters doing slow-mo crying? It's stupid. It looks like the film knew it was stupid. That's why he slapped him and he didn't kill the creature. So the flimsy writing, the overbloated cast, Larry Fong's, like, inability to show you where the human characters are in relation to these massive creatures, kind of all coalesce in this one scene in which it just comes off and I'm laughing and I'm supposed to be moved. I'm supposed to feel emotional about it. So those are the main problems with the films. But we'll get into maybe the more positive stuff. So John C. Reilly's in the film, and he actually plays the character that you first meet in the film, the American fighter pilot. Now, he's been befriended by this group of humans that live on Kong Skull Island, and they're all kind of like silent, I guess, because they didn't want to pay anyone to come up with a new fake language. But anyway, John C. Reilly's there, and he's kind of funny, but he's kind of a tragic character because he still thinks World War II's going on, and actually it's been like, you know, 30 years since then, and he wants to get off Skull Island. And he's a kind of funny, heartwarming character. He's not the deepest, and sadly, the film doesn't give the most amount of time for his character, sadly, to develop himself. Beyond, basically, there's this bit, you know, towards the back third of the film where he says that I had a friend here and he was my best friend and we looked out for each other, and if it weren't for him I would be dead. And this is the Japanese fighter pilot that he fought with. But this part of the film, this relationship that would have been quite interesting, other than this line, this expositionary line, nothing else is given for this film. So other than that, you've just got John C. Reilly doing a commendable job at balancing the serious tone and embodying all the serious tone of this film that I actually take seriously with the comedic stuff. So he was decent, but he's just hardly explored really throughout the film, and it's a shame. And speaking of kind of like expositionary dialogue that just seems a bit forced, you've also got these weird forced lines in the film that just completely take you out it further. So you've got 2 moments in this film that just smack of like, what the fuck were they thinking? Is that you've got Mark Evan Jackson, who plays this guy called scientist Landsat Steve. I haven't got a fucking clue who these characters are, by the way, and I've seen the film. Like, I don't know any of the names because they're not memorable. And there's a bit where they're on this ship and before they go into the helicopters to fly to Skull Island, and they're doing this expositionary like presentation about what's going to happen and the need to go to Skull Island. And one of the characters is explaining that it's basically they need to map out the geography of Skull Island by dropping these massive bomb things, right? And what he does is he makes this joke. One of the soldiers goes, "Hey boys, we're not soldiers anymore, we're scientists," and they all laugh, ha 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 ha. And then Mark Evan Jackson's character just randomly out of nowhere goes, "You are not scientists," and it's just like, shut up, shut the fuck up. No one asked you. Like, bully him, please bully him because he's a twat. So that moment was just a bit like, what? Like, was that supposed to be funny? It was just stupid, like unnecessary. But then it becomes actually downright offensive later on in the film because I mentioned it earlier, but there's Brie Larson and she's holding this camera and she's not got a gun and they're surrounded by all these creatures in this, this smoky pit and they're all gonna die, right? In this very scene, in this sequence, you've got John C. Reilly, who's probably one of the best characters in the film, and he's hiding behind this skull thing, right? And this creature's like really close to him, you know, you can almost smell him, right? And then randomly out of nowhere, he just goes, "I told you this was a bad idea." And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, if someone did that in Alien and the xenomorph was there, everyone would be like, fuck off, this is bullshit, this is so stupid, what are you doing? But because the film isn't this survival horror, which kind of, and I will mention it and reference it later, that King Kong does, Peter Jackson's actual Oscar-winning classic, does really well. It becomes this survival horror when they finally do get to Skull Island, but that film's 3 hours and this one's 2, so maybe that's where all the problems are stemming from. It just comes off as stupid, you know, like, the film isn't a survival horror, so I guess you can get away with going, "I told you this was a bad idea," but still, I'm trying to enjoy the film, I'm trying to be scared here, I'm trying to get something out of it, and when they fucking include bits like that, I'm just thinking, nah, they don't give a shit. They don't want it to be scary. I'm not sure what they want this film to be. They're trying to be funny at one point, they try and do action at another point, and they try and develop characters at another point, and it just, none of it really works. Look, it's pretty mediocre, this film. Like, they're both rated similarly in a lot of people's eyes, Godzilla and this film, but for me, Godzilla is such a much better made film than Kong. But saying that, Kong does redeem itself in the end, because whilst you do see him throughout the film, Kong, you don't see him a lot. It's the final fight that really works, and things seem to come together then. Larry Fong's cinematography finally does it. He finally keeps the humans in context with the creatures. And in fairness, there are shots and moments throughout this film in which it does happen, but because Kong's in it so little and the creatures are in it so little, in a way, and I'm not just meaning like Godzilla, where like you don't, like, Godzilla and the monsters, the villainous monsters, are in the film, you just don't fully see them, right? You're following them, they are there, but you just don't fully see them. In Kong Skull Island, most of the focus is actually on the human characters. Kong's fucked off, he's off camera, and the creatures are there, but, like, you know, there's a spider one, there's, you know, a few other ones that they have to kill, but once they've killed them, they're the little ones, they're the small fry, they're gone. So the big skull crushers, once they make an appearance, they're the main baddies, and then, you know, the rule of context, monster, human, right, you understand where everything is in camera, you don't have that until the very end. And there's a sweeping kind of like helicopter shot that shows all the humans running away, and Kong is coming in and he tackles the big skull crusher, and finally I'm thinking, yes, he's fucking done it. And at that point, I'm really enjoying the film. That last fight got me giddy. You know, Kong picks up this bit of like a rotary blade from this massive like ship that's been like shipwrecked on the island, and he's got this chain on and he's swinging it around and it gets into the neck of this skull crusher and he pulls it apart and it fights, and it's reminiscent of the King Kong fight against the 3 T-Rexes in Peter Jackson's version, and it starts to get me excited, and then pretty much after that, 10 minutes after that, the film ends, and that's about it really. So I know I've harped on a lot about this film, but it just annoys me because, you know, going from Godzilla and how production-wise it just really worked, even if in reality, emotionally, effectively, it falters. This film, I felt, just didn't even have that as a redeeming factor, because the helicopter fight scene didn't land, it was just confusing, the characters and the cast were too big, and you didn't have enough time to flesh them out, and even with the time that they did have, they didn't do enough to make them anything other than just like one character trait. And then finally, there's not really enough Kong in the film for me to get excited about the action, because I'm forced to be with these human characters. So I really wanted to like this film as much as Kong, but because of these reasons I couldn't. And when you've got something like 2005 Peter Jackson's King Kong, where I go onto YouTube and watch that fight scene between King Kong and the 3 T-Rexes, that shit is legendary, and I'm not just doing a pun because they made these films, but it is amazing. You know, you've got the 3 T-Rexes, the reveal of the 3rd T-Rex, the swelling of the music, how it dies down when they're on the rope vines, or, you know, how Naomi Watts' character swings into the mouth of the T-Rex, and then Kong looks up and he has to go and climb up to fight him and stop him, and how he's handicapped by holding Naomi Watts' character, and he has to fight with his feet and his elbows, and he's getting hurt because of it. And then that bit right at the end where Naomi Watts comes over and sides with Kong by standing under his belly, and then she jumps out of the way and he fights the final one and breaks its jaw, and then he stands up and he goes, ooh, and he, shouts and screams. That shit's fucking awesome, and it holds up today, and it's 20 years old. And I'm getting hyped up just talking about it because it fucking worked, and that shit's 20 years old. 20 years old. That film won Oscars, right? That's the level of indifference that we're talking here. So it's just disappointing. It's just disappointing with this film. And the only thing that kind of redeems this film in my eyes is the fact that it set up the legendary Monsterverse afterwards, and we've got the ensuing films from there, because Kong, in my view, as an action star, does get redemption in the subsequent films. So yeah, Kong Skull Island, would I go visit it like the characters? Fuck no. I'm disappointed in the film, and as you can tell, I really do like these monster kaiju films, so when they do stink, they really do stink. But it's actually I think probably a lot of people are going to like this film, because it does enough. For me, it didn't do enough. If you really like this film, because, I'm looking on IMDb and it's got a higher rating than Godzilla, that's fine. More power to you. It's only my opinion. And if this is your favourite of the Monsterverse film, then I think that is the beauty of this series of films, because, look, none of them are masterpieces. Let's be honest about this. Mikasa Tsukasa, let's be honest. It's not great. None of them are, going to be treated as, cinema. Oh my god, amazing. But people will take different things and like different films for different reasons, right? And if you just want a bit of mindless action, Kong Skull Island has probably got the most heart of all the films. If you have been switching your brain off for all of these Monsterverse films, then yeah, I can see you really liking Kong Skull Island. But for me, it didn't have me roaring. All right, so there you go, Kong Skull Island.